that make sense?
Yes, I think what I'm asking is why, or what could help people more. First of all, when you look at their standards, it may or may not be a positive one.
Right.
It could be a completely wrong premise leading to a completely inadequate or incorrect or overwhelming standard of value leading to a difficult self-evaluation. So I don't see how many people can begin to understand that if they say, oh, what's wrong with me? I don't know if they know, how do they learn to go back to premise, standard of value, and self-evaluation?
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Where in the education system or where in our upbringing do we ever get that?
Well, we don't really get that.
That's right.
So that's the short answer to the question. But the other answer is that you do have your emotions. And emotions are important. Now, they're not important in the way that I think they get put out there in various forms in the culture. We, in my viewpoint, live in a very emotionalistic culture where whatever anybody feels, that's right. Just because they feel it. But emotions don't tell you whether something is right or wrong. They tell you what you think is right or wrong, but even that may be incorrect. And we would have to go into really a longer explanation of how emotions form and the relationships to thinking and evaluations. But the point is, they are valuable. You can look at what you're feeling as a starting point and at a minimum say, this isn't right. Something's not working. I feel terrible, and this isn't how life should be. And that's really the statement. When someone comes to consciously or subconsciously, when someone says to himself, this is not how life should be, that's the starting point. And maybe it would take someone in an educational system or wherever to let a person know, hey, if you ever get to the point where you're saying that to yourself you got to do some things. But I guess we're not quite there.
Well, I think what happens is how our self-concept, how we feel about ourselves. In the case of Sharon, how she felt about herself just promoted her husband, where actually she was looking for his validation, but in actuality, she never had validated herself.
Exactly.
And so it didn't matter what he did. She needed to be able to validate herself. And she had to go down that road to evaluate herself in order to give herself validation. Because I think as a student, the same thing, unless it's a really good educator, that educator is going to go towards those kids that are bright and they see a lot of hope in and a lot of great future. And the ones that don't have that good self-image or self-concept, they're not as attractive, and they're not as, you don't want to reach out to them and invest your time.
Yeah, both of those things that you said are true. I mean, as was mentioned in the talk, Sharon was already an equal member, more than equal by any rational criteria, but she didn't realize it. She didn't have that self-validation and thought she had to do more and more and more to get something from her husband, but she really needed to realize just how much she was doing. But the second part, there's actually all kinds of studies, and when you guys take my social psychology class, you'll read about these, but what they did, I don't think you can do this anymore. They did a lot of stuff back in the 60s and 70s that you just can't do anymore in research. But what they did was they told teachers, okay, this is a group of students, they're like the alpha students, or they gave them letters or colors or something like that. These students are outstanding. And then they told another, well, it was teachers, they told them two things, but this group of students, the beta students or whatever, they're not so good. The way that teachers treated different groups was significantly different, as demonstrated by all kinds of differences in test scores, emotional maturity, how much attention, literally in time, they would give to students. So your point is very well taken that not only is it a self-concept of a person and how that person projects or carries himself, but then what other people think of that and what that does to their desire to reach out and help that person. All kinds of research supporting that idea and reality.
And I think in the case of Sharon, her husband didn't have a good self-concept.
Oh, wonderful.
He certainly was not going to have her change hers.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like he was happy to have her do all that stuff.
Sure.
I mean, he had his academic research career, and she's taking care of all the stuff at home. And
So why would he want to change her? Why would he want to make her feel like she was really somebody?
yeah, well, you want to hear an interesting clinical anecdote about alcoholism? Okay, thank you very much for saying it. You've heard of enabling, probably, and codependence and those catchphrases, but they have some legitimacy too. One of the reasons it's very difficult for a person who's an alcoholic or a drug addict who is in a relationship to get out of it is because when that person starts changing his behavior, the partner doesn't know what to do, and they'll start doing things to get that person back on the way. It's an interesting interpersonal relationship dynamic. And often what the case is that you get people, I'm just going to use the example of a woman who grows up in a situation with an alcoholic father. Her behavior growing up is very much shaped around her father's alcoholic behavior and however her mother responded to the husband. So again, it's the idea of you use concepts you know. And so when you're in a relationship, how you know to behave is in response to alcoholic behavior. When you're dealing with somebody who's not alcoholic, you don't know how to behave with them because that's not the set of concepts and related behaviors that you have. And so it's not coincidental that many women who grow up in families with alcoholic fathers subconsciously, I don't say consciously, subconsciously end up even seek out men with that kind of behavior. That's what they know how to do. And it's a paradox because it's control. It's actually stability. And you think, wait a minute, you're talking about an alcoholic person or a drug addict. How can life be stable? Well, it is in the context of someone who grew up with that and organized their personality and all their behaviors around that situation. It's very interesting.